Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David.
And I'm Matt.
And we are the Taylor Bros, coming to
Yeah.
you, from our famous podcast studio, or not so famous and not so studio.
Yeah, exactly. Just two rooms in two different houses. Wow.
But yeah, wherever you're listening to us, whether it's in the car, in the kitchen, whether you know us or whether you don't, we just want to appreciate you and thank you for listening. Matt,
Absolutely.
do you want to take us away with something?
Yeah, well, I thought today I just want something to say to you, David. I just want to say, sorry for all the things, that I've ever done. It's just, ever hurt you, if you ever felt hurt about those sort of things. And I just want to say, in this public forum, it's important that that you know that I didn't mean any of those things. I didn't mean to hurt you, and I hope that you can get over those things. Is that all right?
All of the things. Wow, it's very general. Thank you, Matt. I feel like
Yeah, so obviously that wasn't a genuine apology. That demonstrates somewhat of we're talking today about apologizing, apologizing well, apologizing badly, and that demonstrated a few key aspects of a terrible apology. I mean, number one, very generic overall, just nothing specific. Didn't actually take ownership of the things. I just said, I'm sorry for the way it made you feel. And I kind of justified it by saying I didn't mean to do it. So I didn't mean to hurt you, therefore it's not really my fault. So those were some aspects of a terrible apology.
So yeah, before we go any further, you put this topic down that you thought, hey, it'd be really good to talk about apologizing, making apologizing count. Why did you want to talk about this?
We've spoken quite a lot about trust in the last number of episodes, and of course making it count. Generally, we've spoken an awful lot about relationships in different forums and formats, and you don't have to be a relationship for long on this world before there is a mistake in a relationship, or there's tension and there's a wrongdoing, and there needs to be reparation made. And apologies are a key part of that, in making reparations, bringing that relationship back together, and then stepping forwards. But they can be done badly, in such a way that it's just, okay, well, this is something I need to do in order to get to the ends of, or it can be done with that good motive. And of course, we've all seen the public apology by a company or a political party or a political figure or public figure who basically just kind of goes, whoops, didn't mean it, we'll do better next time. And everybody can see straight through that. That's not a real apology. They don't really care. And it's the same. I'm sure we have all done the same in relationships, both on the receiving end and the giving end, where we have given an apology. It's the classic case where you've got two kids who have been playing and maybe fighting, and one of them has said something to the other, or something, they've been fighting, and then the adult says, now say sorry to each other. And they might say the word, I'm sorry. Do they mean it? Do they really express regret? Do they express the remorse for the wrong that they did and the pain that they genuinely... No, they don't. They're certainly not in the moment when the emotions are high. And so I think it's an important conversation to go, how can we think about apologizing well and receiving apologies in light of some of the things on trust and moving forwards in relationships?
Yeah, and so that's really interesting because we hadn't really talked about this before, but you're seeing it in the light of trust. And one of the ways I've recently read about trust was that trust is about promise making and promise keeping.
Yes.
That's how you build trust. Well, if you make a promise and then you don't keep it, that's how you break trust. And then, like you said, that now requires, or probably should lead to, an apology of sorts, right?
Yes.
And whatever that looks like. And we've all heard of the 5 love languages, right? By Gary Chapman. Well, I don't know if you've come across it, Matt. This is all I came across in my reading, the 5 apology languages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very interesting. And there's a quiz to go with it. And one of the things, it's at the top, it goes, which phrase is more meaningful when what's a more meaningful phrase when someone says, and then it gives you 2 options. And you just go, oh, if someone said that to me, or someone says that. So What's more meaningful, this or this? And I was doing this quiz, and the first thing I noticed was that I don't think people have ever said any of these things to me. I started realizing, I was like, but they all sound great, you know?
Yeah, I can't tell you because nobody's ever said it.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I mean, probably people have apologized to me, probably.
Wow.
But nothing was like jumping to mind. It was not like this moment where I was like, oh yeah, like someone said that to me. Yeah, that was quite significant.
Yeah.
So it was very much like a stimulated imagination. So and it made me think like a lot of things. Am I so unapproachable that people have not been able to approach me to like apologize? Or has nobody ever wronged me? Or you know, don't they know that they wronged me? Maybe they didn't know they wronged me because they
Mm,
didn't notice, or I didn't let them know. So that I didn't have the courage to let someone know. And so it's just I had these like moments of realization where it's like, oh, am I so difficult to apologize to? Or what's going on here that
mm.
or are we just unapologetic as a society and we do things like what you said? We just give excuses. Oh, well, I didn't mean to, so I shouldn't bother apologizing because
Yeah.
really I didn't mean to hurt them. And if they got offended or if they got hurt or if that didn't go right, well, that and maybe um, we know people that would say we're quite a is it litigious?
Oh, litigious.
Yeah, like
Litigation.
that's the one where actually if I admit or if I say I'm sorry, I'm now liable. I've
Yes.
admitted it.
Yeah.
So then there's a problem
It's
there. And
risky.
so
Yeah.
so it's too risky to apologize because then there might be a financial or a personal like responsibility to this person
Right.
more than what I would be willing to do. So they're just some of the initial thoughts that came up.
Wow. I was fully expectant that when you talked about this quiz, you were going to talk me through it live on the podcast. I'm glad you're not going to do that.
Oh, I
Uh,
have heard a podcast where they did that. Well, not that quiz, but they did talk them some through like a personality test and who they were
uh,
like. It was
well,
Mark.
maybe that's a future Make It Count episode. I
Oh,
really before we dive any deeper on this as well, just maybe this is a good roundup quote, but I'm going to say it now because it was the quote that I saw when I originally was thinking about this. But it's from a computer science professor, a guy called Randy Pausch,
mm,
and he says a good apology is like an antibiotic. A bad apology is like rubbing salt in the wound. And
mm,
I think that gets to, it's an imagery of, oh yes, an antibiotic helps to bring healing to whatever the wound or the sickness is, and rubbing salt in the wound just brings more pain. It just bring, and so that's what we want to be doing. We want to be moving towards that reparation.
So I wonder, did you want me to talk you through the 5 apology languages?
Absolutely, you
Everyone,
can't tease us with that and then not give us them.
well, let's talk about the first one first. That makes sense, doesn't it? Um,
First
it
things
seems
first.
like a really obvious one, but the first one was expressing regret. In effect, going, I'm sorry, and then being able to maybe list the hurtful actions.
Yep.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
I think so. Yeah, it's one of those things where we might get into this in a minute, but when you think about apologizing, often it goes hand in hand with asking forgiveness. And when I think about we've spoken about forgiveness before, even just and you go, oh, one of the reasons why people maybe don't or feel that they won't offer forgiveness until someone shows remorse and regret. And so we want to know that the person understands what they've done and feels bad about it. Basically, it goes back to that we talked about that, the couples counseling, and the wife said to the husband, I there's just a couple of words that I want you to say, like a 3-word phrase. And he was like, oh yeah, easy, I love you. And she was like, no, I understand you. And I think that's the important part of it. It's taking the perspective of, I regret this because I understand that it hurt you in this way.
Mhm. So I do with some work at the moment with a Christian nonprofit organization. We go into lots of primary schools. So that's like ages 5 to about 11. Mainly I'm working with some of the more slightly older kids, but I would say this is the apology that we as adults and teachers try and encourage children to do. It's the, okay, say you're sorry. Do you regret that? Well, hopefully there's some sort of, like you said, there was remorse. Oh yeah, and we're trying to get them to that level where they realize what they did hurt the other person. That's quite difficult. But that's the apology we sort of drive for, which is interesting because the second one was the second apology language is accepting responsibility. So it's this idea of taking ownership. And clearly stating what they did. It's like, oh, if I was apologizing to you, it's like, well, yeah, okay, I'm really sorry. Today I turned up late for the podcast, and I know that's wrong, and I haven't got any excuses. I just need to, make sure I don't do that.
Yeah.
It's sort of just owning it. This was my highest one when I did the apology love language test. This was the most important one for me. If the person on the other side owns it, no excuses, no faffing about. Like, actually, the first one, the expressing regret, that didn't really impact me much. The second one, this one, accepting responsibility, big deal.
Interesting. And I think that's probably because that's one of your key values in the way you want to live your life. It makes a lot of sense. And some of the things that I was reading about, they were saying it's important, this one, but it's also important to only take responsibility for your part. Don't take responsibility for their part or everything, and don't over apologize. So actually, like, there are obviously British culture, the British are kind of notorious for saying sorry a lot, and likewise with the Canadians, they're saying sorry a lot. But if someone bumps into you in the street and you both apologize to each other, nobody kind of breaks down in tears and goes, "Thank you so much." No, it's a small thing. And often those, I think part of it is like, well, maybe I'm getting a little bit off piste, but sometimes it maybe feels insincere to people outside. Like, why are they always apologizing? Like, nothing's happened. There's nothing wrong. In a sense, it's become a bit of a verbal tick. We just apologize. I actually tried it one time. It's really funny. I was walking through a restaurant or something, and I bumped into someone's chair, and they apologized to me. And like, well, I was the one that was moving. You apologized to me. But yeah, the responsibility part, absolutely. Because if you go, oh, I feel great regret for the wrong I did, but you don't actually take responsibility for the action, it is almost two-faced. And I think everyone can intuitively know that. And that's where you get the cliched, I'm sorry you feel this way. Because it's regret for the hurt feelings, but not for the actions. And I'm not taking responsibility for the actions that I did or didn't do.
So Simon Sinek, the public speaker and sort of motivator, talks about a time when he was doing some work with the Navy SEALs. And the one time he was doing this morning meeting, and some of the guys weren't there, and he was like, well, what's going on here? And they said, well, we're deciding whether we need to basically kick one of these cadet Navy SEALs home. Basically, we need to get rid of him. It's like, well, what's happened? And it's like, well, he's fallen asleep on watch. And like, well, it's not great, but like that, this is months of training that have even already gone into this person, like however much the value of that is. It's like what is that, that's happened that's led to this person potentially being kicked off? It's like, well, you don't understand. So one of the SEALs, it's like, when he was confronted with this, he denied it, and he said he didn't sleep. And then when the evidence came through that he had fallen asleep, he then sort of like admitted to it, but it was too late kind of by then. And they were like, he only admitted it when he was proven, otherwise. And they said there was another cadet that fell asleep on watch. He owned up to it. He took 2 or 3 weeks of like, extra training or punishment, but we trust him because he owned up to it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was sort of talked about in here is accepting responsibility, but also not just basically not sorry I got caught.
Yeah.
And that being the second one. The third one, to move on, is quite an interesting one as well. It's making restitution. So making things right. That apology love language, probably some people are listening here and going, yeah, that's what it speaks to me. It's like, it's not, I don't need you to feel regret necessarily, but you need to make it right. Something was wrong, something was broken, something was damaged, make it right. What do you hear there, Matt?
Absolutely. I think I now can identify what some of the other ones are going to be, because although I've not heard it in the same language, languages of apologies, or the 5 apology love languages or something,
Mhm.
but definitely these elements came up in some of the reading I was doing, and it comes under different names: making amends, or I think the psychological term for it is the offer of repair. And effectively, it's as you said, this is almost a mark of sincerity, because it's going, okay, I recognize I've done wrong. I'm sincerely expressing regret. I've taken ownership for what I did or didn't do, did say, didn't say. And now I'm saying, and I know that because there's been a break in the relationship, I will make an effort to repair the relationship in some way. And often, in many cases, it would just be a case of, I won't do that again, or next time I will follow through with my work. But for example, if you accidentally broke someone's item, you would go, I'll offer to replace that or repair it. That is literally the offer of repair. And in doing that, you show the relationship is important enough for me to go out of my way to make an effort to repair the object, and actually therefore the relationship.
Yeah, and Andy Stanley and his wife tell a story about when they went out for a meal. They got the babysitter in to look after their children.
Yeah.
Had a really nice time. Came back, and the babysitter sort of reported that it hadn't gone that well, and actually their children had played up quite a lot, and they were like, "Well, this isn't good behavior. This isn't right behavior." And Andy says he thought about it for a little while about, what would be an appropriate response to this for his children. And he realized, well, ultimately what they've done is they've damaged the relationship that those children, but also the family, have with that babysitter. So they basically challenged them, well, said to them, you have to, was it buy flowers
I think it
for
was.
for this babysitter? You have to buy flowers for her because you have to make up that out of your own money, your own pocket money. You have to restore that relationship. And that was sort of his thing. Is like when there's a requirement for an apology, it's probably that damaged relationship. And how do you make restitution? How do you repair that relationship? And so he tells a couple other stories around that area. The
I just put a brief note on that. This isn't the topic for today, but what I love about that is it's because that's in the context of disciplining children, right? And I think that word discipline, and when it comes to children, can have a really bad rap because lots of people have had bad experiences of it, where effectively there's a one punishment fits all crimes, and it's often to do with physical pain or isolation. It's like, no, actually the reparation needs to fit the wrong. And so that I was a perfect example of understanding, well, what has happened, what is the wrong. Ultimately it's a relational tearing, even if it, or just straining. Okay, so the action is to repair that and go out of your way to do that. And I think he actually drove them over to wherever she worked or something, and they delivered the flowers to her in her place of work, and said a written apology, or had a written apology with it as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly like you said. So that ties into some other stuff. The fourth apology language is genuine repentance, or like genuinely repenting. And this actually, for me, as what I could understand by it, was about a change of behavior. Like no more excuses. It's not just, I'm sorry that I was late for this appointment, and then next week, I'm sorry I was late for this appointment, and then next week, I'm sorry I was late for this point. No, like that apology language is, I'm sorry I was late for this appointment. This won't happen again, and then it doesn't happen again.
yeah.
And this one was quite high for me as well.
Yeah.
So these two, and I think we all know that. Like ultimately, that's quite hard. I think I realized, the first one, genuine regret, well, that's quite easy to show or even to put on, shall we say. But if the person we're apologizing to wants a genuine change of behavior, like we'd recognize that behavior change is quite difficult. And so that's quite a high bar to reach an apology. And so, maybe that's partly why people have not been apologizing to me, because it's like, wow, the language I need is you to change your behavior to make sure that doesn't happen again. And
Yeah.
if people are like subconsciously or consciously aware of that, then they're maybe not going to apologize to me, because it's like, well, for me to feel that apology, it means you need to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And I think that, again, all these marks are a show of sincerity, because obviously the term repentance isn't actually just a case of I feel sorry for. That's often what we think it is. That's where the regret and the remorse comes in. The repenting is literally the turning, the changing of behavior, the changing of direction. And so it's ultimately the follow through of the apology, because it's going, I've done a wrong, I've broken some trust, or broken a promise, and therefore there needs to be reparation now. And actually, often that is a case of the way that I show that I've done that is by changing my behavior from here on out. Otherwise, if I haven't, have I really apologized? Have I completed the apology almost, or did I just, do what I needed to do to patch up the moment?
Exactly. And so the last one, the fifth apology language, according to Gary Chapman of Love Language fame, talks about requesting forgiveness, and that being a part of it. And he even talked about this idea of there being time then, like, hey, Matt, I've wronged you. Can you forgive me? Like, and actually in that moment, that gives you time to go away and go, well, yeah, there was some hurt here. Should I forgive? Should I not? Like, what is that? And just acknowledgement of it being a time in the process.
Yeah. And I think it's an element there as well of recognizing in the language we've spoken about before, like everyone has an emotional or a relational bank account. And in breaking trust or making a wrong to someone, I have made a withdrawal. And so the asking forgiveness is going, I recognize at this point that I am now in relational debt to you. And I'm asking for you to forgive that debt. I don't have any rights. I can't, the making of amends is an attempt to go, I'm willing to pay back in. But there is ultimately an aspect of there's now a debt and it's up to them. And I release control. I'm asking for them to say, yeah, we're clean. And that, I forgive it. Not necessarily I forget it, but I forgive it. And then you can come back together again. So I think those are all top. I think those are great.
Yeah, I think they're really useful, but it's not the only model. And at the risk of complicating it a little bit, there was a 2016 study done with, I think it was like a journal article, Conflict and Negotiation. So they looked at it and they went, these are the 6 stages of apology. And it was expression of regret, explanation of what went wrong, acknowledgement of responsibility, declaration of repentance, offer of repair, and then request for forgiveness. And their view was actually those are stages that you go through. And I think I would probably be slightly more in line with that, because rather than, oh, you just need to change your behavior. Well, if I wrong you and I don't bother saying I'm sorry, I just say, oh, I'll just sort of subtly change my behavior. It's not is that even apology, or is that and so I think there's an element of, actually we probably do have to go through these stages. We go, yeah, I'm really sorry, yeah, I need to accept what happened, this is what I see that went wrong, actually how can I repair that now, but how can I make sure that doesn't happen again, and I know I've wronged you and that's hurt you, so can you forgive me? And I think we don't do that, probably because on both sides of it, that's vulnerable. I have to be humble enough to apologize, and you have to be humble enough or vulnerable enough to admit that you've been hurt. And if we're in a space where there isn't trust, we put up our invulnerability. You can't hurt me, I can't be hurt, so we all just pretend that nothing's happened, and so we never apologize or get apologized to, because we're pretending that we don't need apology to. And that's probably something that has shown up a little bit for me, whether and I think I'm something I'm growing in a little bit, of just owning and actually taking intentionally. I've realized when I've wronged people a little bit in the last 6 to 8 months, to just go out of my way and just go, hey, by the way, I'm really sorry that I did this. Like, I made a mistake, and like, can you forgive me for that? And sure, I won't do that again. But yeah, I think that piece of like invulnerability, or required of humility and vulnerability on both sides, is quite an interesting idea.
I think that's spot on. And I think ultimately, yeah, I can very much relate to that idea of like wanting to make a change in the background almost, but not having to actually address it. So it's an apology in action, but not in person, because I want to effectively avoid the discomfort of that vulnerability in the moment.
Mm.
And I think one thing I want to say as we close out, I mean, there's so much more we could say, but we've spoken about obviously the importance of a good apology and the damage of a bad apology. But I would say don't be discouraged and think, wow, this is, because it could potentially think like, oh, this is even harder than I originally thought. So an imperfect apology is still going to be better than no apology. But again, just check your motives. Are my motives to repair the relationship, or to ultimately try and elicit an apology from them, or to try and make basically a justification for myself? So I would say, don't be afraid of that imperfect apology. It's better than a no apology. It's certainly better than a bad apology, but it doesn't have to be perfect to get there. And one of the things we spoke about right at the very beginning was kind of like expressing that sincere regret. Now, you may realize, oh, there's definitely something going on in this relationship. It's tension, but you might not understand why, or you might really not fully understand what. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I noticed there's some tension. Is there something that I've done that has upset you? That is just an open question, and they can then handle it. And then if they come back and say, yeah, this, now you can go, now I know what's happened, and you can express that regret and all that.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the thing, is just be careful, because we do this probably in cultural waters that we swim, is this defensiveness, justification, reason, or if we're less generous to ourselves, excuses. And those things, actually, I think it ultimately is quite important, the ownership aspect of it. Like, we own when we've done wrong and when we've fallen short. But also sometimes if there's not a trust there, it's difficult to do that. You know, if I'm in a trusting place in a relationship or in an organization that trusts, it makes it possible to do that, to own that, but also to realize there's a way forward. If there's not, we hide that. We know people hide that, and that becomes more problematic. But yeah, so I think we should wrap up here. But this has been a really interesting thing. We put the interesting episode. I'll put the two links in, one to the quiz for the apology language, and one for the sort of article I read about apology languages. It'd be interesting to hear what you guys come up with, what you think about that idea of an apology language and apologies. And maybe you think, yeah, it's not true at all, we apologize all the time. Or maybe you think, actually, yeah, why do we find apologies really difficult? And yeah, just your view on what we're talking about. Get in touch at the usual place, which is Matt.
makeitcount.pod@gmail.com.
There we are. And until next time, go make it count.